What is up, everybody? Let me see here. Turn the comments on so I can see your guys' comments. So it's just me today. Hayden, unfortunately, is not going to be able to join us. But as I said before in the little channel announcement thing, we're going to be revisiting the Zodiac Killer case. It's been a while since we've talked about really any true crime, but that was actually the whole Zodiac Killer stuff was actually some of the first stuff I think on the channel we started uploading content about. And so, yeah, so I'm here today with Drew Beeson. Drew, I know I told you, man, but thank you so much for coming on the show and agreeing to do this. And let me annoy you for a little bit about this case. I know we've gone to talk about it before, but again, man, thank you so much for coming on.
No, thanks, Cole. Good to be back.
Yeah, so again, I just want to let everybody know, please, everyone watching at home, post your comments. If you have any questions for Drew or just comments in general, stuff you'd like to point out, please feel free to comment down below. I love to highlight those comments and interact with you guys as much as possible. So please don't hesitate to do that. I'll be keeping an eye out on the chat throughout the live stream. So Drew, just wanted to start this off. Let me see here. So could you give a little bit of info about yourself? I know MHS has, our viewership has kind of grown a little bit since the last time we talked. So we have a lot of new subscribers, people who on our end maybe aren't necessarily familiar with you or your work. So could you tell the audience at home a little bit about yourself, what you do, your books, things like that?
Sure. In my spare time, I write true crime books, and the first three I've done were, of course, one about the Zodiac Killer. It's called Sighting In on the Zodiac Killer. The second book I did, it was a D.B. Cooper book called Paratrooper of Fortune, about a person of interest I have in the D.B. Cooper case named Ted Braden. And then I also did one that I did a show on here before on, which was Disappearance of the Yuba County Five, which is a group of 5 guys that went missing in 1978. So I've been really busy with just those 3 because they just keep kind of building and more things come out. So I just, always wanted to do a 4th one, but those just keep building and building. And I started that about 4 years ago. So trying to do, I do other videos on the side, my YouTube channel. But as far as the cases, I'm really heavy into those 3. And then I try to pick up something new, like a missing persons case. But it's mainly those top 3 cases, which is what I like. It's a classic American unsolved mystery, basically, starting with being influenced by the TV show Unsolved Mysteries with the great Robert Stack. Just ever since then, I just always loved the unsolved aspect of something. If it's solved, I lose interest because now we know who did it, so it's like I just want to move on.
Yeah, I hear you for sure on the unsolved cases being a little bit more interesting. There's a few here and there for me where I'm kind of into, I like to look at, but yeah, definitely the whole unsolved aspect of it, definitely gives it more of an interest for me too as well. So what's new with you, Drew? I mean, what have you been up to? Like I said, it's been a while since we've got to talk. I know obviously you talked about the books that you've already written. I've been keeping an eye on the channel, man. You've been doing good stuff there. I've seen you start doing some live streams. I try to jump in when I can. What are you up to? What's new going on with you?
Just keeping up with these books. Like I said, since I was on your show last, I've been out to the some of the sites of the Zodiac Killer. I went to Arthur Lee Allen's house, at least outside, which was cool. I went to Lake Herman Road, where the first Zodiac crime happened in December 20th of 1968. So that was kind of neat. I did some videos from the different sites. I went to where the payphone was at Tuolumne and Springs in Vallejo, California, where the Zodiac used the payphone to call after he attacked a couple at Blue Rock Springs Park, which was on July 4th, 1969. So it was kind of cool to go to some actual sites of a case I'd been into. So it was kind of full circle getting able to do that. That was kind of late last year. So that was really neat. And then, I've done some other podcasts on that, and then, always researching, always trying to find new things and kind of crowdsourcing, you hear that a lot, which to me, that just means reaching out to other people, even if they don't disagree or they have another spin on the case or whatever. I don't shut anyone out, but I'm able to kind of gather up with some guys who come up with some really good stuff. Guys like Stefan Nyberg, and I'll talk about him a little bit. Another guy named Tony Donnelly, who finds some great stuff. These guys, have probably more time than I do to do some research. So it's great to exchange ideas with them.
Yeah, and I just want to let the viewers at home know we got tornadoes going on in Oklahoma, so I've already seen I'm kind of like lagging a little bit. So if for some reason the broadcast just suddenly ends, just know what's going on. I apologize. Hopefully that doesn't happen, but we'll see. Um, so you talked about visiting those real life actual locations with, like you said, the payphone and all that. I gotta imagine that makes the case probably a little bit more surreal, right? I mean, what was
Oh,
that?
absolutely. It really does. I mean, Vallejo is, I'd never been there before. I didn't grow up there, but it doesn't look too much change with time. I mean, the neighborhood where Arthur Lee Allen's house was is the same. Where there was an IHOP that kind of plays into the Zodiac Killer case where Darlene Ferrin worked, not at the time of the murders, but she had worked there earlier in her life where Arthur Lee Allen could walk over to that particular IHOP restaurant. It was a typical, A-frame IHOP restaurants that you see. It's now a Mexican restaurant, but it's still there, which is cool. So I actually had lunch there and sat in one of the booths that I could just imagine Arthur Lee Allen and Don Chaney sitting there, maybe being served by Darlene Ferrin. Vallejo just seems like a town that hasn't changed much at all in 50 years. So it's pretty surreal just to go be around there.
Absolutely. And so you talked about, you're still obviously talking about these cases. You're still looking into them. What's new with the Zodiac Killer case? To be honest with you, man, I keep an eye on like the Reddit, the subreddit, but that's really about it. I haven't really read or researched a whole lot. I'm kind of rusty on the case, but has there been any new breaks in the case, or have you discovered any new pieces of information that you'd like to share?
Yeah, I'm always running across, I'm always, things and people send me things and I hear stuff through the grapevine, if you will. One cool thing that came up with this Stefan Nyberg that I mentioned, he's from Sweden and he found something that was just it was kind of basic, but it's important in this case because one of the hallmarks of the Zodiac Killer that we know because he sent a lot of letters, he made ciphers, of course, and that's like the biggest part of the case. And I think most Zodiac Killer researchers can agree that the correspondence was more important than the attacks to him, to be able to create this terror through the mailing campaign, right? And one of the things that always pops up in the letters was that he would misspell words and people would debate, well, was he just a bad speller? Was this something that he was doing for fun or something like that? And I think one thing that Stefan found that was just really simple, and it came from the Zodiac Killer's exorcist letter that was mailed in 1974. It's considered the last verified piece of Zodiac Killer correspondence where most people agree that it's most likely the Zodiac and not a copycat or a hoax letter. And in that letter, he uses the word satirical comedy. He's talking about he had just seen the movie The Exorcist. And what just something simple that Stefan found was that in the two words satirical comedy, Zodiac, of course, misspelled them, where the words would always sound the same. If you read it out loud, it'd sound the same phonetically. But he noticed it with satirical and comedy that what the Zodiac did was just switch two of the letters out to make them misspelled but still sound the same. So he took the I from comedy from satirical and put it in comedy, and then took the E from satirical and put it in comedy. So he just basically switched two letters, and it was the third letter in each word. So that's definitive proof that he's doing this intentionally. He wasn't a bad speller. He's doing this because he enjoys it. And it's oddly something that Arthur Lee Allen did and was known to do before the crimes ever started, which I point out a lot. But I think just that simple example of satirical and comedy in the Exorcist letter, just switching out two letters, is a great little find. Just to be further proof that he's doing this intentionally. He wasn't a bad speller. It's part of his persona, if you will. So always collecting little things like that from people.
Yeah, and it's always interesting how that's even, I guess for me personally, in my opinion, how that's even like a point of contention because you're talking about with the Zodiac, someone who, like you have talked about as well, someone who is very intelligent, someone who, could draw diagrams, bus bombs with the bus bomb letter. I think you talked about light tables before in the past, right? Someone
Oh,
who had
absolutely. Yeah, that's
experience.
I'm heavy on that. I'm heavy on the fact that he had a drafting experience and obviously used a light table to construct the ciphers. That's why all the letters are in perfect rows. You have to have a light table with graph paper, graph paper under your main piece of paper so you can see those little boxes. I mean, no, I mean, there's people that are good at freehanding that are artists, but you can't freehand it to make it that perfectly vertical and horizontal. He was using a light table, which the layman wouldn't have had. This is somebody that can draft. Another thing that I've always worked on a lot is I believe he knew celestial navigation. You see a lot. You see the compass rose over the Mount Diablo letter. You see, Michael Cole's theory. You put up Zodiac Revisited earlier. Every time you hear Zodiac Revisited, I think of Michael Cole's book series. It's called Zodiac Revisited, and I highly recommend it. It's a 3-book series. And one thing that Michael always thought, even before his books came out, because he had a blog, was he thought the Zodiac had celestial navigation experience. He thought he was trying to line up some of the crime dates with the solstices and just a lot of things with directions. Like I mentioned, the compass rose, the radians, and things like that. So I'm definitely a believer in that. Of course, my suspect is Donald Lee Cheney, and he had celestial navigation experience. He had formerly trained as an Air Force navigator, having that. So I lean heavy on that, and of course, drafting, because how many individuals are going to have all that? And Don's one of them that he could draft, he had celestial navigation experience, he knew how to sew really well, which is another thing that comes up a lot in this case. So I'm always looking for that kind of thing and kind of developing it more.
Definitely. And that reminds me, I don't remember the name of the special it was on History Channel. It was done a few years ago, but it was those two guys looking at Ross Sullivan and Lawrence Kane, and that was one of the things that they actually talked about was how all the killings or all the canonical murders, I believe, took place on really significant days on the Zodiac calendar, which had the crosshair symbol, if I remember correctly. So I definitely think that there's for sure something to that. And I think that definitely gives credence to your suspect, which leads perfectly into the next question. Donald Lee Cheney, obviously, is your suspect in this case. For the viewers at home, again, who maybe aren't familiar with Cheney and why he's your suspect, could you go into a little bit of detail about why he's your suspect in this case, your top person of interest?
Yeah, I started with him and still on him. There's people in this case and DB Cooper case as well. I know guys that are, the experts on the cases, and they're already on suspect number 2 or 3. If I ever go to suspect number 2, then that I'm out of the case, because I wouldn't do it. If I ever saw anything that exonerated him or whatever, I'd just say, okay, I'm out. I wouldn't move on to the next guy. But Donald Lee Cheney comes from being friends with Arthur Lee Allen. And Arthur Lee Allen is, of course, the prime suspect in this case. Still to this day, he is considered the prime suspect. And it's very difficult to debate that. And there's people can argue why he's the prime suspect. They could say that he was the focus of the Robert Graysmith book that turned into the David Fincher film that came out in 2007. And the person of interest in the film and book, of course, was Arthur Lee Allen. That's if you don't have a suspect, it's not as compelling as a movie. And Arthur Lee Allen gets on the radar because his friend, Donald Lee Cheney, brings him forward as a suspect in July of 1971, and forever changed his case. That's one of the things I say a lot and repeat a lot is this: we don't know this case as we do it today if not for Donald Lee Cheney, because if he doesn't come forward with Arthur Lee Allen, we just don't have what we have, because Robert Graysmith probably never writes the book, or he writes it about a weaker suspect and it's never made into a major film. And it's just not what we have today. It'd still be intriguing and it'd still be unsolved. You still have the ciphers. You still have that logo that creates this theatrical atmosphere that makes it so interesting, but it's still not near the same that we have because Don coming forward with Arthur Lee Allen. And that's just what I say is not what you would expect when you have a guy that brings forward somebody. And if he's doing this for any other reason, you don't expect that suspect to have such great circumstantial evidence, number one, because we're still talking about a circumstantial case here. There was fingerprints taken from 2 of the scenes from Paul Stein's attack in the Presidio in San Francisco in 1969. They got some fingerprints from a phone booth in Napa after the Lake Berryessa attack, where he used a phone to call after that attack. He also did that after Blue Rock Springs, as I mentioned earlier to you. But that's really where Don Cheney comes from, is being friends with the prime suspect. And my whole theory is that Don Cheney created this thing that I call the Zodiac persona, and Allen was more of a patsy and kind of a lesser willing partner in all this. Is just kind of the whole basis for my theory. And the more I dug into Don Cheney, of course, I would find more and more circumstantial evidence. And people say, well, that's just your own confirmation bias. And the only way to, you're always going to suffer from some level of that. And I think the only way to get around it is just to say, hey, here's what I found. People can make of it what they will. here's the information, and let them come around to it organically, and let them weigh it on their own. That's the only way to get around it, because if you have a suspect, of course you're going to keep digging into that person. That's what you do naturally. You can't just stop. And if you find something intriguing, you can't just not mention it out of fear of being accused of this confirmation bias stuff. I mean, you also have to be open if you find something that would exonerate them. So I try to be open with that as well. So that's where I get Donald Lee Cheney, is from being friends with Arthur Lee Allen, and that all came from a documentary called His Name Was Arthur Lee Allen that came out in conjunction with the 2007 David Fincher film, because Don Cheney was saying weird things. He said he would lick Arthur Lee Allen's stamps for him. Of course, why would he do that? Because he's worried about the DNA showing up. He said he gave Arthur Lee Allen his thumbprint and a ball of paraffin wax. And I remember when I first watched that video, I had a little bit of case knowledge, but not a lot. But when I watched that, I was just zoned in on this guy, and I wanted to know more about him. So that's what started the whole thing for me.
For sure, and I apologize to the viewers at home. I've been watching. I was wondering, why am I not seeing any comments? I think the storm outside is causing issues. So I go ahead and pulled up the live stream on my phone, because I want to make sure we ask some of these questions from the viewers. Someone said, Captain J said, "Hi Drew, any updates from?" Hopefully I'm saying this right. Stefan, in regards to comparing Don Cheney's letter to Zodiac's August 1969 letter.
I did try to do one more. I think he's talking about the Good Times I Had in Vallejo letter that was sent to Vallejo Times Herald, and we did try to run that letter, and we didn't get good results, because I think that letter is really smeared, if I recall. It's kind of like the original copy is kind of smeared. And what he's talking about is, I go back to Stefan Nyberg that I mentioned earlier. He was using something called HAT software, which is named after the developer, and it's an acronym for the guy that invented it in Germany. And it's basically free to download, and it's handwriting analysis. And Stefan did a really cool report on the Exorcist letter, and he compared it to other Zodiac letters. And the HAT software will give you an analysis score, like you compare the Exorcist letter to one of the Paul Stein letters. And he was just kind of using that as backup, that the Exorcist letter is genuinely Zodiac. And just for fun or whatever, or my own interest, I said, hey, can you compare this one letter that we have from Don Cheney that he sent to Tom Voigt back in early 2002, to a couple of the 1969 Zodiac letters, confirmed letters. And Stefan was good enough to do that for me, and they came back with high 70 scores against the Cheney letter. So he didn't even expect that. He's not a suspect guy at all. He never said, I'm backing this guy or that guy. He's pretty neutral. And he said he was shocked to see that they came back with high 70s in comparison. So we tried to do another one, and it was we had mixed results on that, because the original letter was kind of bad. But that's what he's referring to.
And Bat Falcon asked, do you think that any of the quote-unquote non-canonical Zodiac crimes were committed by the Zodiac?
I think if any of them were, I would always say the Linda Edwards, Bobby Dominguez murders in 1963 at Gaviota Beach, which is not too far from Santa Barbara. That was always kind of seen most like Zodiac. I mean, it's a couple alone on a beach, kind of like Lake Berryessa. There was I think a 22 round, 22 caliber long rifle shell found at the scene. I think they were both dragged to what did they call a lean-to hut, and the attacker of Linda and Bobby tried to burn them alive inside that hut, I guess, to get rid of the evidence or something, but it didn't burn down all the way, so they found their bodies. But that one always to me sounded the most like Zodiac. I mean, but that's just comparing to Lake Berryessa. And now I'm kind of not totally dismissing the Ray Davis murder, which happened in 1962 in Oceanside, California. Now we're in Southern California. This is far away from the canonical Zodiac crimes, which of course are the Bay Area, Vallejo, Benicia. And he was shot in the side, I think the side of his head, like Paul Stein was. Of course, he's a cab driver like Paul Stein in 62. But I think after Ray Davis was killed at his cab, that the killer of Ray drove the cab a few blocks away, like behind the mayor's house or something. I can't remember. And but there was a phone call after the Ray Davis killing, kind of like Blue Rock Springs and Lake Berryessa, where the Zodiac made a phone call after those two crimes. So Ray Davis is one that I kind of, because of a friend of mine really digging into that case again, has me wondering if that could have been an early Zodiac. So I would say those two, Ray Davis and the Gaviota murders in '63. Sherry Joe Bates, I don't. I still don't think Sherry Joe Bates was the Zodiac. I think he took an easy credit for it. He liked to take credit for things. And for anything new, I say that I will say this. Here's something new that I won't say exactly what, but people can read between the lines. Is I know through a back channel that some people are doing some deep research into a non-canonical Zodiac event, and they pretty much have debunked it. So that'll be coming out pretty soon. Something that I'd say is a non-canonical Zodiac. It's not Sherry Joe Bates, but it's going to be pretty much debunked, which is just going to be some proof that the Zodiac claimed things that he didn't do.
Yeah. I know for a while, me personally, I was pretty torn on the Sherry Joe Bates thing, but yeah, I think over time, evidence seems to point to the fact it probably wasn't Zodiac, which I guess kind of goes to show, how complicated this case can get, because you got stuff on the surface where it's like guys sending letters to the media and family members, and doing this murder that's in some ways maybe similar to in certain aspects, and it just turns out that there's really nothing, no real connection, I guess. So
Yeah. So with Bates, of course, they found out that the Bates had to die letter was a hoax,
yeah.
and it was a really cryptic announcement from Riverside PD. But they found out that it was a guy that admitted to hoaxing it, and they never released the name of the guy for of course. But they were able to rule out that he was the killer of Bates. And I think they may have said Zodiac, but they said definitely he was not the killer of Sherry Joe. So that took another leg out of that being Zodiac, is finding out that one of the Hallmark correspondences after that was deemed, at least deemed by Riverside PD to be a hoax from somebody who admitted to it. And that happened from a letter that he had sent in, I guess, admitting to it. And they tested the stamp from that letter. Of course, that letter was, I think it was sent in the 2000s or something pretty early. It wasn't like the late 60s like the Zodiac. So they were pretty comfortable that at least that one letter was not the killer.
Interesting. So yeah, and just another reminder, everybody, I'm keeping an eye on your guys' questions, your comments on my phone here through the live stream. But I promise by the end of this live stream, I will get to your guys' questions and make sure all those get to Drew. So keep asking your questions, keep making your comments. I appreciate y'all being so active in the chat. Let's see here. So you talked about Don, right? And obviously I like what you said, that, you're not going to just jump from one suspect to another, but have you encountered any other possible suspects, people that kind of interest you, where you could see, a case could be made that they could be a viable suspect?
I would say the only person that ever comes to mind that could have had involvement, or somebody may have knew him, is a guy named Fred Manali. And he was this weird guy that lived in Santa Rosa at the time. He taught at Santa Rosa Junior College, and he was potentially a suspect in the Santa Rosa hitchhiker murders, which Robert Graysmith tried to tie Arthur Lee Allen into kind of loosely in his second book that he wrote. And of course, there's nothing definitive tying Arthur Lee Allen to the Santa Rosa hitchhiker murders, other than Arthur Lee Allen did have a trailer in Santa Rosa. He lived at 32 Fresno Street in Vallejo, of course, which is ground zero for the Zodiac crimes. But at the same time, he had that trailer. He actually had two trailers. I don't know how much he spent at the second one. And then somebody actually told me he had three, but I know he basically lived between Santa Rosa and Vallejo. But that's really the only tie that Allen has to Santa Rosa. But Fred Manali is a strange guy. Like I said, he was a creative writing teacher, and a lot of his phrases turned up in the Zodiac letters. So if he made a good suspect, otherwise, he'd be somebody you'd have to look at. And he comes up because he got killed in a head-on collision. I think it was in 1974. The Santa Rosa hitchhiker murders, I think, started in like 1970, 71, kind of after the last confirmed Zodiac crime of Paul Stein in October of 69. So Manali gets in this head-on collision. It kills him. and they found these drawings either in his van or back at his house. I'm not sure which. I think maybe back at his house, but he had a like this really sadomasochistic drawing of one of his students named Kim Allen. No relation to Arthur Lee Allen, but she was one of the Santa Rosa hitchhiker victims. And so when they found the picture of Kim Allen, they wondered if he wasn't the Santa Rosa hitchhiker killer, because it was this real sadistic drawing that he did himself of Kim Allen. So that makes him a suspect, I guess, in all the Santa Rosa crimes, but definitely for Kim Allen. But they didn't find anything else conclusively. DNA. I think they did recover some DNA from one or two of the Santa Rosa crimes, but it hasn't tied back to anybody yet. I'd love to see whatever they have tested against Fred Manali, but some of his phrases seem like they were either borrowed or could have been found their way into some of the Zodiac correspondence. However, I don't think it could have been Manali as a Zodiac, because he's really tall. He might have been 6'3", really thin. He just doesn't fit any of the, stocky, bulky descriptions of the Zodiac. But he's somebody that interests me, outside of the nucleus of Arthur Lee Allen and Don Chaney.
So I have to ask, thoughts on Gary Post?
Yeah, I saw you did something on Post a while back when
Yeah.
he came out. And what's interesting about some of these guys that come out and they're like the, kind of the flavor of the month. Post really never got off the ground, for people that are really into this case. He never went anywhere, even on the Reddit thread. He was a non-starter for Zodiac regulars. He just was. A lot of lay people saw the news blitz from the case breakers team, as they call themselves, but I was already familiar with them because of their DB Cooper suspect, Robert Rackstraw, and they put all this behind him, and he's Cooper, and they did all this TV, and at the end of the show, they basically, the people that are on his side kind of turn on Tom Colbert and say, we don't think it's him. So this is now their Zodiac suspect, is Gary Post. And, the evidence they put forward for Post was horrible. It was terrible. They said that the scars on Post's forehead were matched up to the Zodiac sketch. Well, the lines on the Zodiac sketch were age lines. They weren't scars. And people put way too much into that sketch for the Zodiac. And it's something I think about a lot. That sketch looks like anybody from a college or high school yearbook for about a 30-year period that wore glasses with a crew cut. It looks like anybody. And that sketch was from the input of teenage kids, the oldest being a boy that was 13 years old named Lindsey Robbins. He was looking out of a second-story window at night across the street, where they saw Paul Stein's cab, and they saw a man get out of it and wipe it down. And that whole entire sketch is made from the input of Lindsay, 13. I think a younger sibling was I don't remember her name. I think she was 11. I mean, and they're the main input into the sketch, really. And they showed it to Officer Donald Falk, who believed he saw the Zodiac that night, and he basically said, "Yeah, it's kind of close to what I saw, but the guy's face I saw was a little rounder." And they went back to the kids and amended that sketch once, but Falk never really had any real input in it, which is a shame, because if it started with what the kids said and then immediately went to Officer Falk, he could have maybe improved on it or something like that. But they didn't. So that sketch it's basically useless. I think it's just something people look at and say, it's got to be him. Like Ross Sullivan was so popular because he looks so much like the sketch. Forget about the fact that Sullivan was 6'2" and 300 pounds, which way rules him out. I mean, we know we know he was that big in February of '68 because he got caught in Santa Cruz, where he lived, naked in a phone booth. So, and Sullivan had Pickwickian syndrome, where it was like it's like an apnea disease, but it causes you to gain more and more weight. So by the time that sketch was done in October of '69, I guarantee you Ross Sullivan was every bit of 350 pounds. That's going to rule him out. I mean, for any crime. But no, he looks like the sketch. But going back to Post, there's just not much for him at all. I saw nothing. And of course, they're going to go up the mountain and look for the guns and all this stuff. But we're old guys. We're in our 50s. We can't crawl up the mountain and look for the guns. I mean, he's terrible. I'm just going to be blunt about him. He's awful. There's a newer suspect out named Paul Doer. I don't know if you've looked into him. A guy named Jarrett Kobeck wrote a book called Finding Zodiac. And it's kind of like in this weird style. But I think Paul Doerr is far better than Gary Post. And at least there's some kind of intriguing stuff about Doerr. I don't think he's a Zodiac, but he's definitely better than Post. So I think there's some decent circumstantial stuff for Doerr, with the magazines and the influence and stuff. He did live in Vallejo. He's got that going for him. So I'd say he's far and above better than Gary Post. But the thing with Doerr, when he came out real hot on Reddit, book did really well, got a lot of media, and everybody's like, well, aren't they gonna test his fingerprints? Aren't they gonna test his DNA against what they have? I knew that's never gonna happen. It doesn't matter how intriguing a suspect looks, they're not gonna do any of that. Because first of all, I don't think they have his fingerprints or his DNA, by the way. People need to understand that the SFPD, if it was ever in their possession, it's crap. They had the way they stored that stuff was an abomination. It was a complete abomination the way they stored the letters. Any evidence they had from the crime, it was handled by multiple people. Because of the mystique around the case, certain officers took the stuff home and let their families mess with it, touching the letters, this and that. They supposedly got the best DNA sample is from a letter written in 1978, which is considered not to be authentic Zodiac. And they did what's called PCR testing, kind of like a COVID PCR test, which is really delicate. You have to do it under a really controlled DNA lab, which the San Francisco PD DNA lab is a laughing stock. I mean, I could just read article after article about how the people didn't even have basic training in it. And so to go off of a non-agreed upon letter and thinking that they actually did that right to get a decent sample is laughable. So it's just kind of where we are. So no, I never expected anybody that comes up to be tested against any of this stuff. I just don't. So of course with Doerr, he just didn't go anywhere because none of that happened.
Yeah, and the whole Post thing, Jim Buchholz was nice enough to let Byron, who's a friend of the part of the channel, he sometimes when he has time, he'll make videos and stuff, and he got to interview her, and she was nice enough, especially when they were getting all that media traction to come on the show. So I do appreciate her, and she does have a really good podcast. I can't remember the name of it, but she's very intelligent, and she's actually helped, I think, solve her and her other investigator that helps her. They actually, through social media, through Facebook, were actually able to solve an old cold case a while back. So, she's very smart and intelligent, but, I definitely think people, can get sidetracked, especially when it comes to Zodiac case. If you're not familiar with all the suspects, if you're not familiar with all the details and everything, I could totally see how, and that's what I've always said from the beginning, like, I don't think Post is a Zodiac, but, I could see people being new to the case or just not being that familiar. Like you said, kind of like layman, just not having that knowledge that maybe you have that see like Post being a suspect. But, the whole mountain thing, I would think, if you for sure have this weapons stash where he's got stuff buried and the hood from the Berryessa attack.
I'm running up that mountain.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
If I have a broken leg, I'm going to hobble up that mountain. If I think I'm going to find a gun from one of the crimes or the hood, I'm hobbling up there.
Oh, yeah. And, I'm filming the whole thing. I mean, I'm whatever I got to do, to show like, hey, this is real legit stuff. And I would not be sitting there. Yeah, I totally hear you for sure. And I'm glad you brought up Paul Doerr. I did read this book. This is actually a really good book. I have to say it's very
it's well done.
Yeah, and it captivated me. I mean, I couldn't put it down. It's Kobeck does a really good job. I recommend the book, and I think Doerr's a good suspect too. Honestly, I really do. I think he's definitely a stronger suspect than Post. But yeah, I just want to throw that in there because I knew we were going to talk about that, so I wanted to make sure.
He's not bad. I mean, it's a shame they don't have more photos of him. I've only seen kind of 2, and there's one of them is older, which is basically useless. I think there's one of him where he's got a bow and arrow and he's using his left hand. So some people are thinking that he's left-handed, and I can tell you Berryessa was a right-handed attack. But people are saying, well, he's just posing or whatever. But he's not bad. I would not say, I'm biased, but I wouldn't say he's terrible at all. He's far better than Post. He's far better than Sullivan and Kane all day long. all day long. And those guys got way more attention that they deserved. Larry Kane and Ross Sullivan are just, they're terrible. I mean, they're bad. I mean, I like the way that Kobeck went about developing a Doer for sure, but guys like Sullivan and Kane are just, they need to go away.
Mm. Yeah, I can't lie. When I first got into the Zodiac for the first time, I saw that famous video on YouTube about Sullivan, and I was like, oh yeah, that's the guy, because I was just obviously, like you said, like looking at, oh, he looks like the sketch, and he's connected to the Riverside with Sherry Joe Bates and everything. So, but yeah, definitely, I agree with you 100%. I think when you really look at those guys, there's really nothing there to, consider them strong suspects for sure. So let me,
Nothing.
yeah, let me see. So I'm gonna go ahead and look at some more of the questions here for Drew. Red Feather asks, can you talk about the ABC murder's influence on the Zodiac?
Yeah, that's. I don't think we probably ever talked about the ABC murders, which is a Agatha Christie book. And we know the Zodiac was influenced by things that are from England, like the Mikado. And, and some of the words he would use would be a way that people in England would use them. Some people have even speculated what's the Zodiac from England, because he'd say Happy Christmas instead of Merry Christmas. That's more of an English thing. And so in the video, that it is just a gold mine for me, is his name was Arthur Lee Allen, because Don Chaney is in that video. And I study everything that he says in it, because he's giving himself away under the guise of Arthur told me. He's basically, to me, it's a confession from Don Chaney. He's telling you that he did it. He's kind of telling you how he did it, and he can do this easily because he says, "Well, through Arthur, this happened." So that's his he's just fading it over there. But what he's basically telling you is how he did it, what influenced him. And during that video, he mentions what he thinks that Arthur Lee Allen's modus operandi was. And he said, I knew it was in this little book. And he said, Arthur never told me the name, but I knew what it was. It was called The ABC Murders by Agatha Christie. And when you read that book, you find so many parallels to the Zodiac case, because, in that book, it's about, 4 different crimes, and one of them was a targeted crime. And after each attack, there would be letters to the police detective named Poirot in it, and kind of taunting letters. And if you read the letters in the book, they're so Zodiac-ish, the way he's taunting after these crimes. And it's kind of the blueprint for the Zodiac murders, in my opinion, was the Agatha Christie book, ABC Murders. There's a character in it that's a lot like Darlene Ferrin. She works at a breakfast type restaurant. I can't remember the name of the character, but it's even something similar. So there's a lot of stuff in that book that's like Zodiac. And it's weird that Don brings it up, but he says, oh, Arthur Lee Allen never told me the name, but I knew what it was. It was ABC Murders. And then you read it and you see so many parallels between Zodiac and that book.
Gotcha. Captain J, you might have already answered this question, Drew, earlier, but maybe not. I may be incorrect. But he said, Drew, when you were on the Vanish podcast, you said something about a major announcement coming soon about one of the non-canonical crimes. Can you give us any more info about that? Was that what you were talking about earlier?
No. Yeah. One of the non-canonical crimes is going to be debunked for the most part, from what I know.
Wow.
Yeah, it's going to be debunked. So it's going to be a pretty clear case of Zodiac claiming something that was found out not to be true. Big shock, right? We can't believe everything a serial killer said in his letters. Right. Yeah, I can't really say which. I'm kind of hiding that, but yeah, that's out there. And another thing that people are talking about now, I don't know the actual source. People can just guess or read between the lines, but they know that Vallejo PD sent their letters in for DNA testing about 3 years ago, maybe 3.5 years ago. And supposedly they got some good results out of one of the letters, maybe 2, but the rumor on the street was that they got a DNA profile, but it was somebody that could not have been the Zodiac. So people were speculating, well, what does that mean? And through the rumor mill, I heard that it was a DNA profile of a woman that came from one of the Vallejo letters. So that kind of even puts even more doubt on whatever SFPD has, who stored them in a shoebox, probably that had rats in it or something. But I would assume that Vallejo PD probably did a little better job of keeping their letters, but they get a DNA sample, and now it's supposedly, through the grapevine, from a woman. So we're pretty sure Zodiac was a male, but maybe, he was in transition. I don't know. But that's
Yeah.
the rumor. But it is true. Vallejo did send their stuff off for, modern DNA testing to try to get a DNA sample from underneath the stamp or the flap or blah, blah, blah. And that's just not a perfect science, unfortunately. But, if it was a male sample and it matched the one from the 78 letter, like, let's say the Vallejo letter was from, like the Good Times I Had in Vallejo that he mentioned earlier, matched up to the 78 letter, well, that would be huge, because then you could say, we know the 78 letter is legit, where it says I'm back with you or whatever. That would be big, but it's not going to match because it was supposedly from a female. But that's the rumor.
Did they ever check? Do you know if they ever checked Cheney's fingerprints with the print they found on the taxi cab for the Paul Stein murder?
Yes, according to George Bauer, they tested Cheney's fingerprints, his handwriting, which I think is similar, and but according to Bauer, he did not know if they tested Cheney's DNA. So when I got into all this, I just assumed that they had all that. I just assumed that they tested his DNA. That apparently happened after Cheney wrote Tom Voigt a letter, and the handwriting was so similar that he alerted SFPD, and then Cheney supposedly gave a volunteer DNA sample that I assume was tested against the 78 letter, because that's what Allen was tested against, the 78 letter that supposedly matched one of the 74 letters. We don't know if that was the Exorcist letter or another one, but and I'm not sure that those two match each other, because like I said, the SFPD DNA lab is a hot mess. There was false convictions, there was all kind of trouble with that. So apparently Allen and two other suspects we know for sure were tested against that 78 letter. It was Allen, Mike Rodelli suspect, Gel Covale, the exotic car dealer from San Francisco that was a horse racing guy, really wealthy. He was one, and he tested negative. And there was another suspect that they never named. It wasn't Cheney. It was a guy. It was a father of a grad student from New York City, and he was convinced that his father was a Zodiac. I don't think I ever heard whoever that suspect was. It wasn't Cheney, but those three were tested against the 78 sample and were negative. So if Don's DNA was ever tested for sure, I don't know. I just assumed that it was, and I don't think they have it. I honestly don't. As far as the fingerprints go, I don't think the Zodiac would have been dumb enough to leave his fingerprints even on the cab. I mean, that's up for debate. We know when the Paul Stein was shot, there was a lot of blood, and the paramedics arrived. But some people say, well, I'm sure that they made sure the paramedics all gave their fingerprints so they could be ruled out. There's no record of that, number one. And when it happened, they just assumed it was a robbery. No one thought when that happened it was Zodiac. It was a lone guy in a cab at night in Presidio. All the other crimes were couples out in Benicia, Vallejo, Lake Berryessa. They weren't even in the city. So no one thought that was a Zodiac when it happened. Nobody did. So I really don't think they have him. I kind of agree with Brian Hartnell, who is a Zodiac survivor from Lake Berryessa. He's an attorney, a multi-disciplined attorney. He's married to an anesthesiologist. He has two grown sons. He lives in the Riverside area, oddly enough, and he wrote an article for Riverside Lawyer about 3 years ago, and he says, I don't think the Zodiac left fingerprints anywhere. He was too smart to do that. I'm paraphrasing, but that's what he said. And I go with Brian, a guy that if we didn't have his account of Zodiac, we don't know about the Black Hood. We don't know about the cross circle. We don't know about he's the only one that engaged the Zodiac in any conversation whatsoever, was Brian Hartnell at all. And he saw him in the daylight. He was wearing the hood, but without Brian, we don't have that. So I go with Brian. I don't think he would have been that dumb. The kids said they saw the cab being wiped down, but of course the Zodiac said he was leaving fake clues. I just don't think he would have left fingerprints. And of course, it was only partials, and the partials from the cab don't even match the partials from the Napa phone booth. So, this isn't just me keeping a suspect in play, because this is all stuff I knew about before I dug into John Cheney. I assumed they had his DNA. I assumed they matched his fingerprints. I assumed they looked at his handwriting. So I knew all this going in. So this isn't, oh, Drew found this out, he's got to keep him in play, because that doesn't work, because it was in the first edition of my book. I just said, I've never seen proof of his DNA being taken. I just take it that they did. And if that doesn't, if people are really hard on this so-called physical evidence, then that's their prerogative. But like I was talking about Door or anybody else, they're not gonna they don't really care, I don't think. No matter how compelling somebody was, unless they find even if they found the hood, they probably wouldn't think it was authentic, because Zodiac would have gotten rid of that. Let's face it. He was smart enough not to get caught. So he may have made mistakes, but too smart to get caught. So no matter how compelling a suspect looks, no one's going to run and go run his fingerprints. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen from Vallejo. You know, if the DNA technology gets even better and they find one that's strong enough to do a genealogy trace on, like the Golden State Killer, then they would probably start that process. But it's just not going to happen. I mean, that's my hope, is that you finally get some conclusive DNA, and if it's something that you can guarantee is Zodiac, I'll live with it. I really would. But they don't have it. Trust me. SFPD certainly doesn't have it, and I'm pretty sure that the Zodiac wasn't a woman. So there we are.
It reminds me of that scene from the Fincher movie where they're doing like that montage, and I think there was actually a point where a woman actually was saying she was a Zodiac. It was supposed to be like a little funny moment in the movie. I don't know if you remember what I'm talking about. That's what it reminds me of.
I think I do. There's a foreshadowing there.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Okay, so we're kind of approaching the hour mark. So if you don't mind, I'm going to go ahead and shift gears a little bit. And obviously, like I said, again, for the viewers, I'll make sure I get to your guys' questions if there are any before we end the stream. So as long as the wind doesn't knock out my Wi-Fi. So I've seen you on live streams before talk about like missing 411. And, that's kind of something I don't know a whole lot about, but I watched they did a documentary. David Paulides, I think is the guy's name, who And I've always found that kind of interesting because obviously we do a lot of like cryptid stuff on MHS and a lot of people connected with that. What are your thoughts on that whole phenomena of the missing 411 in general?
Oh, I love it. I mean, it's so fascinating. David Paulides has started it all, and of course, he comes from the cryptid background. I mean, David was a was a Bigfoot guy. He's ex law enforcement, but his first love, and still is Bigfoot. But when he came out with the missing 411 phenomenon, where people are going missing from national parks and clusters that are his book series, which is excellent, is he was smart about never really giving his own explanation for what's happening to these people in the national parks and where they're going, why they went missing, and he was just pointing out different. A lot of them were either at the high end or the low end of the intelligence scale. Like maybe at the low end with maybe a learning disability, and the high end like super intelligent. And then a lot of the males that went missing were of German ancestry, and just all this interesting stuff. But I think at the end of the day, he probably believes it's a cryptid thing, coming in and out, which I think is fascinating. Just to try to figure out what's happening to all these people. I think he posted earlier, I saw something today about, it's kind of like ties into the smiley face killers, where a lot of these young men are found murdered in bodies of water. And it looks like the bodies were transferred there, is something that I think he just posted about, which is also fascinating because there's so many cases like that. They're not necessarily in national parks, but in cities. They find these young men. They're usually from maybe 17 years old to like 26, kind of like that range, and they find them near a body of water. And sometimes people said there was a smiley face painted by. That's where that comes from, but we don't know if that's an actual serial killer doing this. But it's interesting, if that could tie into the missing 411 or something like that. But some of these cases, I try to pick up one and learn as much as I can about it. Like Daniel Robinson, a geologist that went missing in Arizona, whose father has a YouTube channel now that's trying to keep that search going, where they found his vehicle abandoned in the middle of nowhere in Arizona where he was working, and it looked like it had been in a wreck, but his cell phone's there. It looked like a lot of his clothing was around his Jeep where he left it, and there's no sign of him. I mean, multiple searches, days and days. Now I think it's been 2 years, no sign of him. There's a similar case not too far from me. A boy went missing named Jason Landry. He was a college student, and they found his car that had been just in a slight wreck off a road he shouldn't have been on, in a place called Lulings, Texas. And his father was pretty early on the scene. He lived about 2.5 hours away and just went right there after the police called him, after they found Jason's car and ran the license plate and figured out who it was registered to. And his father found Jason's clothes strewn out all over the road where his car was left. And to this day, Jason hasn't been found. It's been 2 years, not a sign of Jason anywhere. And there's so many similarities between Jason, Daniel Robinson, Terrence Woods, pretty famous case. He went missing up in Idaho, where he just took off and ran into the woods. They don't know why. He was filming the show Gold Rush, Dave Turin's Lost Mine. And he said he dropped his radio. He's on the production crew and he just darted off into the woods, never to be seen again. And it's fascinating what could have happened to any of those guys.
Yeah. Have you ever looked into? I'd be surprised if anyone's ever asked you this, but I've been wanting to ask you this for a while. Have you ever looked into like the LBL attack? I don't know if you've heard of that before, but
I don't think so.
Okay, so it's connected. I asked because it's kind of connected with this whole missing 411 thing with like the cryptid stuff. But pretty much, long story short, it's this supposed and like the Dogman. I don't know if you're familiar with Dogman.
Yeah.
Or not.
Uh-huh.
It's the people in the Dogman community are really into this because a lot of them believe it's happened, even though there's no like official documentation to prove it. I guess a lot of people think it might be a cover up, but pretty much Land Between the Lakes. I think it's in Kentucky. It's a big like national park, protected land. People go there camping and stuff. And pretty much I think it was the early 80s, supposedly is when this happened. There was a family attacked by what people believe was a Dogman. And people are convinced that it's legit. Some people claim that they were like surviving victims. I mean, all this weird stuff. I didn't know if you've heard of it. It was just kind of a long shot, but yeah, I just want to throw that out.
No, I haven't heard that one. I'll have to check it out.
With stuff like that, is that ever something you'd be interested in researching? Because I know you're.
Oh yeah, I love stuff like that. I'm a Patty Gimlin guy. I don't see how that the Patterson Gimlin film is legitimate, in my opinion. I don't see how someone could have faked that. I don't care what someone admitted 2 years later. There's no way that they could have expected the technology that we have now, that you can slow that down, you can enhance it, and for it to have held up since 1967. There's no way. I will debate that with anybody any day or time, that is legitimate footage of a Bigfoot all day long. The way it moves, the things you see on close up, the way it walks, the way it bends. That's not someone wearing a suit could not do that if their life depended on it. The best Hollywood people at the time could not do that. That was similar to the time when the movie Planet of the Apes was made, where huge budget Hollywood movie with big time stars, and they look fake as they can be. And that doesn't. So just two regular guys are going to make something that looked that good back then. No way.
Yeah.
It's real.
I did a deep dive on the Patterson Gimlin film on the channel for anyone watching right now. Maybe visitors to the channel, definitely recommend watching that. I'm right there with you, 100%. Patterson Gimlin film's legit. People can scoff at the idea all they want, but I mean, what's crazier, I think, is to believe that two cowboys were able to, like you said, recreate something that the top level. I mean, they even talked to I can't remember his name, but the guy who was one of the top makeup artists at that time, who was involved with Planet of the Apes and some of the other.
Couldn't do it. He said he couldn't do it with unlimited budget. He couldn't do it.
Exactly. Yeah. But
and these two cowboys are going to make a suit like that. and think to make it a female with breasts and
exactly.
Are they really going to go that far to make it I mean, just to go to that level. And the way that the joints move, you can't wear a suit and have it bend like that. It's just, now I've seen this really nice enhanced close up of her face, and it's just, there's just no way. People can argue it all day long or claim somebody admitted to hoaxing it or whatever. Well, then where's the suit? If that's true, show me the suit and we'll believe it. Well, if you drag that suit out and we examine it, we'll deem you correct. But people can claim that all day long. It means nothing. If they don't have the suit or a photo, they've got nothing. It's legit.
Yeah. And also the fact that you have with the Patterson film subject, I mean, people have done an analysis. You can see mid-back drapery folds. You can see lumbar folds. You can see, I mean, they would have to not only be, Patterson Gimlin, Bob Gimlin would have to be experts on fabric, but they would have to be experts on primate anatomy, human anatomy.
The way the feet hit the ground is not how a human's foot would hit it. There's so many little things that I saw one show where they had a skeptic on that was watching newer footage of it and examining it, and it actually changed their mind. They were like from a skeptic to a believer with the newer technology on the film. They switched because they're like there's just no way.
Mm. We'll have to have you come back on the show and just talk Bigfoot, just talk cryptids or something if you're down. I would love to do that.
Yeah, definitely, man.
Yeah. Are we ever going to see Drew tackle? I know I asked you about LBL. Is that something maybe in the future? Maybe people in MHS might subscribe. Maybe you might tackle some cryptid stuff in the future. Is that a possibility?
Yeah, definitely. Love Patterson Gimlin, anything like that. I like it. I love the stories. It's just it's one of the great mysteries. I mean, Bigfoot's up there with DB Cooper and everything else, and Alcatraz, and it's classic. It's American.
Oh yeah.
Of course, people have their other versions of Bigfoot, like Russia. You have the Almasty, and then I think the skunk ape is the southern Sasquatch, and then I think it's the rock ape, the one that they would see in Vietnam. I think it's called the rock ape or something.
Yeah, the rock ape. Yeah,
in Vietnam, the Vietnam vets would see. I'm interested in that because I love things, Vietnam. So
I asked my dad if he's ever seen a rock ape because he's a Vietnam vet, and he said no. I was really disappointed.
Yeah, probably saw a lot of weird stuff in the jungle though.
Yeah, for sure. All right, G. Well, hey man, I appreciate you. Let me go ahead and check real quick. I should have already done that. I'm going to go ahead and check to see if anyone's got any questions. I know we got Patty Gimlin in chat, so we were just talking about Bigfoot.
I'm a believer in you, Patty.
Yeah. Shout out to Patty Gimlin. Let's see here. I'm just looking up. Captain J said it's so interesting that Don Chaney referred to that book as quote, that little book. Reminds me of Zodiac's Little List. That's a good point. Yeah, Don's interview with Tom Voigt is filled with interesting nuggets.
Oh, there's so many. I mean, it's like the video. You could go back to that, which is a transcript, where he says that he's talking about the watch. That's something I thought about today as far as Zodiac. Somebody else was talking about. It might have been in a Reddit thread. Maybe you saw it, but they always go back to the where did the name come from? And I always said it comes from Arthur Lee Allen's watch. Somebody else just said, I think on a Reddit thread, that they definitely believe, they didn't say it was Allen's watch, but they firmly believe it had to have come from the watch because so rare that the cross circle goes together with the name Zodiac. Of course, the cross circle actually does mean Zodiac, but to have both the name spelled out Zodiac and the cross circle in anything near modern history is only in that wristwatch, and that watch wasn't that common. I mean, it was. They've been making them since I think actually the late 1800s. It's further back than I think. I think they started employing the name and the logo both in the 1930s or so, but that's a pretty expensive watch even today. It's not as much as a Rolex, but it's far more than a Timex or something common. I think back in the day that Arthur Lee Allen would have gotten his, what you got for Christmas 67 would have been about a $250 watch, which was a lot of money back then. So they were not near as common as people think.
Let's see. I just had it pulled up. Cyberbully wants to know, was Don Chaney a Republican or a Democrat?
He was a Republican. Back in the day, his mother was a Democrat, so maybe that explains the angst. His mother was a poll worker in Bakersfield, California, but Don was listed as Republican. His mother was listed as a Democrat. I don't remember if his father was which one, but I know his mom was a Democrat and he was listed as a Republican when he lived at home in Bakersfield in the 50s.
Gotcha. Chris Cosby says, I live near LBL. A lot of strange stories from that area. Yeah, apparently that whole area is like the big hot spot with like cryptid stuff from what I've heard. And like I said, the whole LBL attack.
Is there any UFO stuff with it, or is it all cryptid?
I'm sure there is UFO stuff. I'm not too familiar with that, but the Dogman stuff is really big with LBL. I've heard people say that even to this day that they have encounters or there's still eyewitness stuff. But yeah, the whole Oklahoma too is a big hot spot. There's sightings all over Oklahoma, Texas. You're in Texas, right, Drew?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, Texas. I mean, that's just a big area in general for Bigfoot, Dogman stuff.
Oh
so.
yeah, there's a lot of Bigfoot sightings. East Texas, around Crockett, where my family goes, comes out of back in the day. I've read a lot of good Bigfoot stories coming out of East Texas.
Okay. And this is let's see, cyberbully. So I'm just going to preface this. We have to be careful with this because this still involves people who are still living, and this is just a very sensitive case as well, just given the nature of it. Cyberbully wants to know about the John Bonet case, your theory on the John Bonet case, since you've hinted at it in the past.
I think that's John and Patsy. You could never rule them out as the authors of the letter. I think the most telling thing, I can't remember what the name of the officer was that came over, the lady that has a real weird eyes, that was the Boulder police officer, and how John acted when she came over to the house that morning. I think that's just tells you almost everything you need to know. It's tragic. It's awful. Most people can't even grasp that people would do that with their own daughter or even pose her like that. But it's John and Patsy, whoever they else they were involved with, maybe Fleet White or something weird going on like that. But I know people can't. A lot of people still want to go with that intruder theory, which is really just not possible. I don't think Burke did it. I don't think Burke got mad and smashed her with something at the breakfast table or whatever that thing was when that came out. It's been a while since I've really gotten into it because it's just so dark when that happens to a little girl. But I think it's a John and Patsy thing all the way. There's just too many strange things. Remember the tape that was from the hardware store and that bizarre ransom note. It's just not how it would play out if this was just a random person, for a kidnapping. A kidnapper that would have known what John's pay was and all that would have been able to get her out of the house. So it's unfortunately it looks like John and Patsy being involved for sure.
Yeah, that whole case, we did a couple videos on it, but honestly, I can't really talk about it just because of just how, like you said, how evil.
Yeah, it's just so dark.
Yeah, it's just dark. It's evil.
Yeah, it's just evil to its core.
Yeah,
ugh.
Yeah, God rest the soul of John Bonet, and I mean that with all my heart.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's just such a tragedy.
Yeah,
and unfortunately, we probably, I don't know if they'll never, if there ever will be a break in that. I was really happy when they found a suspect in Delphi. That was just so awful.
Yeah.
Just as bad what happened to those two girls.
Mm-hmm.
It looks like Richard Allen is responsible. I don't know if he'll make it to trial. He looks terrible. They showed pictures of him. He's lost like half his weight. He looks like despondent. Unfortunately, I don't even know if he'll make it to trial. He looks so bad, but he's definitely involved. And they just need to find out if he had any co-conspirators in those crimes. But we know that he's probably the main culprit. And I was starting to wonder if Delphi would ever be solved. And thank God that they found the main guy.
Yeah, I remember Delphi. I had heard of Delphi and the Delphi murders, but Discovery Plus had a good little documentary on there that kind of gave a good overview of the case. And literally, like the day after I'd watched that and started looking into it is when they announced that they had made that break in the case and made that arrest. So, yeah, thank God that hopefully those victims will be getting justice and finally have that case solved. And I know the families and I'm sure are ecstatic about finally getting justice, like I said. So, yeah, thank God.
Hiding right there amongst them all, working at the CVS pharmacy. I think that's the only pharmacy. Delphi's pretty small. I think it was the only pharmacy, definitely the only CVS pharmacy where Richard Allen worked. And he had actually processed the film for some blow up pictures of the two girls that were killed, Abby and Libby, for one of the memorials. How creepy is that? He was the guy, here's your photos. And he told him that they didn't have to pay for him. Like he was such a swell guy. And he was actually the killer of them. That's just so bizarre.
Yeah, awful. Yeah. Chris Cosby says, read about UFO story near Hopkinsville, Kentucky, famous story near LBL. So it looks like we got some UFO activity near that area. So
yeah, it kind of sounds like Skinwalker.
Yeah, for sure. 100%.
Utah.
Mm-hmm. That's another interesting thing. Yeah. Well, I think we've pretty much caught up on all the questions. I'm not seeing anything else from anybody so once again, I want to thank all the viewers This is probably the most active stream we've had since doing live
Cool.
streams. So I'm definitely happy about that. Everyone seems to be enjoying the show. Drew, for anyone watching who maybe isn't familiar with your work or your channels or anything like that, could you go ahead and plug your content where people can find you at?
Sure. My YouTube channel is Drew Beeson, True Crime and Missing People. My books are at drewbeesonbooks.com. Everything's on Amazon. Check it out. Check out the Vanish podcast. We just wrapped up the Zodiac podcast over there. Vanished. It's on Audio Boom, so please check it out.
Awesome. Well, thank you everyone so much for watching today. Make sure you subscribe to Drew's YouTube channel and like all his stuff. And yeah, so thank you again, everyone, for watching. If you're a visitor, please subscribe if you like today's show. And we will see you guys next time. Peace.